So, welcome everybody. My name is Erin Benz. I'm the collections manager at the Montclair History Center. I'm filling in for our usual executive director, Angelica Diggs. She's usually the host for our History at Home program, so I'm filling in tonight. So if you're new here, I see a lot of new faces. So if you're new here, welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight for our first History at Home for 2024. We've been doing History at Home since COVID began back in 2020. So this is our fourth year, entering our fourth year now doing History at Home. So we have a lot more coming up, actually. Our next one is going to be on February 1st, same time, 7 o'clock that Thursday. And that will be with the Friends of the Howe House, actually. So if anybody's local and has been hearing about the Howe House, it's a great chance to meet some of the members of the Friends of the Howe House and hear a bit more of the history of the Howe House as well. So just a bit of housekeeping before we get started. As you entered, you probably noticed and heard the little, this is being recorded. So we are recording tonight for eventually this will go up on our YouTube page. If you search Montclair History Center on YouTube, we'll pop right up. You can see all of our other history at homes that we've done throughout the years. So this is being recorded. So if you don't want your face seen in the recording, just click that little button. It should be in the bottom left corner that, clicks your video off. I do also ask that everybody is muted. I think most people are muted, but if you're not, I just ask that you mute yourself. We just don't want any disturbances while we are doing our presentation. So let's see, anything I missed? Oh, and a special thanks to the New Jersey Council for the Humanities for helping sponsor the History at Home programs going forward. Special thanks to them. And then last thing I want to mention, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We're going to have some time at the end to do some Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to just put them in the chat. I'll be watching. So if you have any issues or if you want Michael to go back to a previous slide or something, just put it in the chat and I'll make sure we go back to it. So, but otherwise, it is time for me to introduce our special guest for this evening. A lifelong Garden State resident, Michael C. Gabriel is a 1975 graduate of Montclair State University and has worked as a journalist, freelance writer, and author for more than 40 years. Gabriel is a member of the Board of Trustees for the New Jersey Folk Festival at Rutgers University and a member of the executive boards for the Allied Artists of America, New York, the Nutley Historical Society, and the Theater League of Clifton. And he serves on the advisory board of the Clifton Arts Center. And not to worry if you enjoyed Colonial Taverns, it is not his only book. He has many other books, including The Golden Age of Bicycle Racing in New Jersey, The History of Diners in New Jersey, great title, New Jersey Folk Revival Music, History and Tradition, and Stories from New Jersey Diners, Monuments to Community. To learn more about his publications and to purchase his books, you can visit his website, which will be at the end, but it's also mcgabrielnjbooks.com. Again, that'll be put in at the end, so not to worry. Or I know his books, and specifically the Colonial Taverns one, is available at Watchung Booksellers as well. So I will let Michael take it away from here.
Good evening, everybody. I'd like to thank Erin and I'd like to thank Angela for inviting me to do this program. Thank everybody who's on the Zoom for coming and sitting in front of your computer tonight. It's much appreciated. So thank you and welcome. My name is Michael Gabriel. I live here in Clifton, New Jersey, and I'm speaking to you from my home office, which is also known as our spare bedroom here on the second floor. So I am an author with the History Press. I've been writing for them, I don't know, at least for about 15 years. I have 5 books on New Jersey history. It's all I write about is New Jersey. And Colonial Taverns is the newest and the 5th book, came out in April. And so far, so good. I'm getting invitations from a lot of organizations throughout New Jersey since last spring. I get invited to talk at libraries and historical societies and museums. I also got invited to speak at a very nice brewery in Morristown, historic Morristown, and that went quite well. They wanted to do a Colonial Tavern night, and I said, well, by the way, it just happens to be the name of my new book. So So that worked out pretty well. The idea for this book came actually from another book I was doing. I did a book, came out back in 2016 on New Jersey folk revival music. And as best I can, I always like to try to go back to the source and go back to the very earliest days. Well, folk music is the music that's a tradition that's handed down generation to generation. And as it turns out, people from Wales and Scotland and Ireland and England, when they came over to the New World in the 1600s, they brought with them their culture and their religion and their food, and also their music, the traditional songs they would sing. And so I learned that for in the colonial era, maybe for people who wanted a night out on a Friday or Saturday night, people would go to the tavern in the village. Tavern was pretty much the hub of the village, kind of the center point. And for entertainment, everybody sitting around the big fireplace, somebody would get up and start singing, and would sing a song that probably a lot of people would know, and everybody would join in. So this is very much in the folk tradition. And when I wrote that in the book, and I said, this is kind of, it's very interesting. This idea that it's kind of this community hub for culture and for people to get together. And I learned a couple other things too. For folk music, you had to learn how to dance back in those days. If you wanted a boyfriend or a girlfriend, you had to know how to dance. Dancing was very important. So all this just kind of struck a chord with me, and I thought about it, and I kind of filed it away, and I said, maybe I'll come back and revisit it someday. Well, I did about 3 years ago. I went back to my notes, and like any good reporter, and I've been a journalist for my professional life, like any good reporter, you always follow your sources, and one source leads to another, or one interview leads to another interview. And I started just exploring this idea of colonial taverns. I didn't really have an endpoint in mind. I really have a goal. I just said, let me see what I can find out about this, because it sounded very, very, very curious, very curious little chapter in history. Well, sure enough, the more I went into it, the more I started finding out about how important colonial taverns were. A lot of times the colonial governments in villages would meet there and discuss their business. Business people would meet there to talk about the price for grain or the price for their livestock. Colonial taverns, then I started really doing a deep dive. Colonial taverns, as many historians that I read, they were the seedbeds of the revolution. Now this really got my attention. George Washington used taverns. He would commandeer them as his headquarters. Taverns became the place where the local militias, where you'd sign up to be a member of a militia or in the Continental Army. The British also commandeered taverns as well. So all these things started adding up, and especially the part about this idea of being the seedbeds of the revolution. This is where patriots and loyalists would come to their favorite tavern, and they would discuss politics and business and talk about this whole idea of declaring independence. And this just is, after a while, you get you almost reach a point where it's almost like a critical mass. And then I said to myself, I think it's all this. I think I got a book here. There were bits and pieces that I would find in all other books. There's been a lot written about colonial New Jersey and the Revolutionary War in New Jersey, all very wonderful books. But I didn't really find a book that really dealt with the local history of the era. And that's, for my publisher, local history. That's the mantra. That's what you always want to find out about, local history, local history. And I soon realized that the tavern, doing research on the tavern, that was really a window into the local history here in New Jersey from that era. And you always ask yourself, it's kind of a goofy question, but what did people have for breakfast back in those days? Well, the idea being what were people doing back in those days? How did they do business? What was their religious life like? What was their social life like? How did they engage in politics and things like that? So my publisher, I've got a pretty good track record now with them. So I've done the 4 books already, and they're always happy to hear from me, and I'm very lucky. I don't take that for granted. And I called my acquisition editor. I said, I think there might be, I think I have an idea for a book here. And I started telling him about it. And he said, yeah, I think you got something there. You do a little more research. And then when you're ready, make a proposal. And I have to submit a formal proposal to the editorial board at my publisher, because this is a business. I mean, we have a very good relationship. I'm friends with a lot of the people there. They're based down in South Carolina. So I started going through, and I said, yeah, I explained what the book was about, and what I wanted to do, what I hoped to accomplish, why I thought it was important, who I thought might be a good readers, because they're not going to publish a book unless they think it can sell it. So, and that went pretty well. And they approved the idea, as they've done for my other 4 books, and sent me a contract. And I signed the contract, had a deadline. I'm a reporter, so I know how to do deadlines. Got a word count. I know how to do word counts. And I was off and running. And my hunches really started paying off, and I started finding out all these interesting things all throughout New Jersey. And so I'm doing research. I'm going to libraries. I'm doing online research. I'm traveling. I like to do my road trips. I like to travel all throughout New Jersey. I like to go places. I like to meet with local historians. I'm a pretty good photographer, so I take pictures of some of these structures that are still standing. They're used mainly as museum pieces for historical societies. Some actually still function as a restaurant or a tavern. And I wrote the book. It takes about 3 years, and I must say, so far so good. It's been pretty well received. So maybe go through some ideas that I came up with here from doing the book. Number one, I'm very fascinated with this idea of living history. I really believe this. History is not something that happened 300 years ago or 500 years ago. Things, especially like during the colonial era and the Revolutionary War here in New Jersey, this is a living history. As I said in my epilogue, we're walking in the footsteps of our forebears. New Jersey, and we should make this very clear, New Jersey is the crossroads of the revolution. Absolutely, positively. I mean, yes, a lot of important stuff happened up in New England and New York, Virginia, South Carolina, Pennsylvania. Sure, all that stuff was important, but New Jersey's at least equal, or in my opinion, even a little more important than some of the other things. George Washington spent most of his time here in New Jersey. Most of the famous encampments and battles took place in New Jersey. All the big events from that era took place in New Jersey. And we had a thriving colonial population here, with all little villages all throughout New Jersey, north, south, east, and west. And I started finding out things about that. Can you go to that first slide about the reenactors in the Battle of Monmouth? Aaron?
1 second. Sorry, now it's not wanting to progress forward.
The first slide with the reenactors from the Battle of Monmouth.
Yeah, let me see what's going on here. Sorry, it's not progressing. Let me see. There we go.
All right. Battle of Monmouth, big key turning point in the Revolutionary War, and it was fought in Monmouth County. And there is there's a state park now dedicated to the memory of the Battle of Monmouth. And every couple of years, hundreds of reenactors get together, and they dress up in authentic British uniforms. They dress up in authentic Continental Army uniforms. And this, to me, I have to tip my hat to these reenactor people. They're very serious about history. It's more than just going through the motions and putting on a uniform. They really believe that this is important, and this is reenacting this battle and this history is something that really gets handed down to our generations. And I was there back in June. Hundreds of people turn out for this reenactment. And I'm very much like when I see the families with the younger children there. They're fascinated by this. And what they're seeing is living history. This really happened. This is not something that was staged. This is not a movie. This is real history. And so people can really enjoy this and see it. And I think it makes a good impression. And so to the reenactors, I say, good job, well done. Thank you for taking this history so seriously, very much. One other thing I learned about colonial tavern life, and this idea that patriots and loyalists could meet freely in a public tavern. A tavern was a public venue. I interviewed this historian out in the West Coast, and he had this idea that the tavern meetings that people took part in during the colonial period in the lead up to the Revolutionary War, he said that this really, according to him and his research, he said this formed the basis for the Assembly Clause in the Constitution. And that's kind of interesting. And I started thinking about it. You know, they're meeting in a public place, and yes, they have to be a little careful what they do and say, but they can meet in private, more or less, but they're kind of hiding in plain sight. And if you think about it, by the mid 1700s, the British authorities knew something was going on. There was something in the air. There was a buzz. So now, if the Patriots had decided to have a secret meeting in some cabin way out in the woods, and the British authorities found out about it, they would say, "Aha, we got you. You're meeting in secret. You're planning a revolution. This is insurrection. You're breaking the law." But no, they would meet in taverns, and they would have these very serious, very thoughtful discussions about what was going on, and whether should they negotiate, should they declare a revolution. And so the tavern was really, that was the venue for all this. Of course, it was a place for socializing and drinking and eating, but these was kind of fascinating. And he said to me, "Well, I'm sure there's people who disagree with me about this idea of assembly clause." I said, "Look, it sounds good to me. Can I quote you on it?" And he said, "Yeah," and he sent me some information. So that's another part of why the Colonial Tavern was so important. This idea that it was the venue for discussing the revolution. I also came to find there's a historian down in Rutgers, Camden. He had this notion, and I never thought about this, but the lead up to the Revolutionary War, I always thought that, well, I mean, back in the late 1600s and early 1700s, America was developing, and we had the 13 colonies, and I just thought, well, this was just sort of, it would kind of roll along throughout the years, and sooner or later it would just become obvious that we would want our independence. Not so. At least this is what this professor and this historian told me. He said that for the most part, all throughout the 1600s and up until the 1760s, people in the Americas, the colonies, were very happy to be a colony under British rule. They were proud of this. They liked the idea. They took great pride in it. But right after the French and Indian War, 1763, the British monarchy started imposing all these taxes and regulations and things like that. People didn't like that. They said, this is tyranny. No, this is taxation without representation. See, that's the part. People say, oh, why do we have to pay taxes? Well, I think they would have been fine paying taxes that were levied by the local authorities. But this idea of taxes coming from some monarch that nobody ever heard of and from across the ocean and trying to impose the will on the people, they didn't like that. That was tyranny. So that's really what led to some of the ideas of, well, we need to, we're patriots. We really want to have our own country. We want our own laws. We want to have a split. The patriots and the loyalists, they actually had a lot in common. The loyalists said, well, yeah, we appreciate these arguments. Yeah, we agree with this and that, but we don't want revolution. We want to negotiate. Well, the Patriots decided it was time for revolution. So, the shot that was heard around the world, the Lexington and the Concord. After that, there was no turning back. And so now we're in the period of war, and New Jersey is now the big battleground for the Revolutionary War. And taverns really, they were really they were the social network that held things together all during this time. And most of them, I would imagine, were sympathetic to the Patriot cause and would help the Patriots and the militias and the armies. So that's these are the things that fascinated me. And I like the idea of local history as being, this is something that ordinary people did, ordinary in quotes. People were not ordinary back in those days. This is historic stuff. I think people really understood the gravity of the situation and what went into this, and a lot of people were really laying their lives on the line. And if you go to the next slide, I'll give you a good example. This is the Indian King Tavern in way out on New Jersey's west coast along the Delaware River. And this is in Haddonfield, very historic town. All the towns out there, Haddonfield, Bordentown, Gloucester, these towns all take great pride in their Revolutionary War history. And this is a tavern which was operating back in those days. It was called something else. Now it's known as the Indian King Tavern. It's a museum. You can visit there with your family. You go there. And the fascinating part about this was that during the Revolutionary War period, the New Jersey Assembly was made up of a group of 40+ men throughout the state. And they were well respected, and they were scholarly people. They knew about law, and they knew about governance and things like that, knew about business. But they were on the run because they were trying to enact legislation, and the British were after them. So if they caught them, they'd be in big trouble. So for a time, they spent in Trenton, then they went to Princeton, then I think they went up to New Brunswick, and then they finally decided to come to this tavern in, hello, Ken. Nice, I'll answer that question. They came to this tavern in Haddonfield. And on the second floor of this tavern, and you can go up and sit in the room, they passed a resolution, and the primary source documents still exist. And in September of 1777, the assemblymen, they decided that from here on in, whenever there's a document that was generated, whether it's about some sort of legal issue or a property issue or something that had to do with business or finance, from here on in, New Jersey would be known as a state, not a colony. Now, okay, they've created a document for New Jersey business and legal matters, but state, not a colony. I think it's pretty clear what they were thinking about, and I think they were laying their lives on the line. New Jersey was going to be state, not a colony. This is what they wanted, and so that's the idea that was behind that. And you can go and you can actually see, this is where New Jersey declared itself to be a state, in a tavern in Haddonfield on the second floor. It's right there. This is inspirational. This is fascinating stuff. Another thing about taverns, New Jersey is the corridor state. You got to go through New Jersey to go get to anywhere you want. And back in the colonial period, New Jersey was the corridor between New York and Philadelphia. And stage wagons and people who would be walking or riding horses, they would follow the old Native American trails. And there were a number of them that took you from New York to Philadelphia. And then they would also ride on ferry boats that would cross the rivers. And in the process of this, people would be traveling. Actually, most of the colonial villages in New Jersey, they basically mandated that you had to have a tavern in the town because you needed it. It was almost like a hospitality business. People who were traveling, it took a number of days to get between New York and Philadelphia. They would need a place to stop, and they needed a place to take care of their horses. They would need a place to relax and get a drink and have something to eat. Maybe they want to spend the night. So in many ways, the tavern business was a hospitality business back in those days. And the tavern keeper was a respected person in the village, men and women. There were a lot of women tavern keepers back in those days. So when people would be traveling through, they'd come in, they'd sit down, they'd order a glass of rum, and the tavern keeper would say, "Oh, hello there, Mr. Jones. How are you today?" "Oh, I'm fine, thank you." "And where do you come from?" "Well, I come from up in the Boston area." "Oh, really? And what's going on up there?" "Well, we're having some problems." So the tavern keeper was taking all this in. So the tavern was really almost like a physical internet back in those days. This is where all the news and all the stories were taking place. And people from the village who wanted to go there and find out what was going on, well, the tavern keeper would collect all these stories. And of course, I'm sure they got more colossal and more colorful as the night went on and the more drinks of rum you had. But this is a way for people to find out what was going on. So the tavern was a place where you could find out news. Colonial newspapers were being printed in those days. They would be delivered by stagecoach to the taverns. And many people back in those days could not read, but those who could read would get up and they'd read the newspaper out loud and let people know what was happening. So again, the idea that the tavern was a center point for a village, and this is where people would receive their mail. This is where they would vote, and this is where they would meet their friends and their business associates. So that's what I tried to capture in my book here. So they were recruiting stations for the militia. What else can I tell you? The newspapers back in those days, mostly many of the newspapers were partial to the loyalist side of view, but some patriot newspapers were around. The newspapers would carry what you would describe today as a real estate ad. They would put the tavern up for auction. It would be a sheriff sale, and they would describe the tavern, and it had this many rooms and this many fireplaces, and they had a 15-acre orchard with the best apples, and they had a fresh spring with running water. And you can read all these things online. That's been saved. And these ads, of course, they're trying to present the best face, but I use this to really find out, well, what was a tavern like? What did they look like back in those days? How were they? What made them so important? They were usually at a crossroads, so they tried to when they came up for sale. So this was very good information for me. So I like that very much. You can go to the next slide, please, Ms. Erin. Who had the first tavern in New Jersey, and where was it located? Well, as you can imagine, after 300 plus years or so, things sometimes get a little murky, but a lot of times you are able to find some pretty direct history. And from a number of sources, I found that there was a man named Henry Lyon, and Henry was a Scotsman. He first came to the New World in Connecticut, and then heard that there were a lot of interesting things happening in Newark, New Jersey. So Newark was founded in 1666. Henry became one of the pioneers of Newark, and he became the treasurer. He was a well-respected man, very learned man. And when the Newark local government, they decided, well, we need the tavern, and who's going to be our first tavern keeper? Well, it was almost obvious. Henry Lyon was going to be our first tavern keeper. He knew business and things like that. So there is in a very historic cemetery in Newark, Fairmount Cemetery. I found out that there was a monument to the early pioneers of Newark, and sure enough, there was Henry's name, and so I think a lot of the remains of these men are buried there. So this is a tribute to Henry Lyon. That's probably our first tavern keeper, and probably the first tavern we had here in New Jersey. So you can go to the next slide. I I mentioned this painting was in the public domain. I found it and I downloaded it right away. I mentioned before about the social aspects of tavern life. Well, very important. If you wanted to be social, you had to be a good citizen, and you had to go to the tavern. You had to learn how to dance. Very important. And you see the fiddle player standing up on a bench there. The fiddle was the main instrument back in those days. This is before guitars became very, very important. So the fiddle player would play music, and there were a lot of these country line dances that they do, and the dances were designed to be rather flirtatious. So you had your eye on a man or a woman that you thought might be of interest, and you would dance, and then after a while you'd get to know this person. So this I love this. And every time I look at this painting, I always spot something else going on. Somebody's going out the front door. There's a little girl with her dolly. That's kind of interesting. This tavern was kind of a family friendly venue. So all kind of interesting stuff happening in this painting. But that was one of my challenges. Like I said, I can take pictures. I went around New Jersey, taking pictures of what I thought would be good really to help illustrate what I was trying to do in the book. But one challenge was, now how can I illustrate what went on inside of a tavern? What would a tavern look like? Obviously, there's no photographs, but there are genre artists from back in those days, in the 1600s and 1700s. And genre artists were very interested in painting scenes of everyday life. They weren't really that interested in painting these grand portraits of wealthy people and princes and kings. They were interested in everyday life. And they were good enough artists where they could faithfully depict what was going on inside a tavern. So I looked around and I had to buy some images, but there were a lot of images that were just, they were in public domain, and I used these. And this, again, it's the idea of me being a newspaper guy. It's the idea of show and tell. You lay out a newspaper, you have your picture on the front page, you have your lead story. So show and tell. And I thought that was important. I'm very concerned when I do these books. I'm very concerned about the narrative. I want people to understand what it is that I'm trying to do. 50,000 words. I mean, that's a lot of words. You have to have a consistent narrative that goes throughout. I'm telling stories. The books I do, these are not academic books. These are not books that you'd find in for a college course. These are stories, and most of them are human interest stories. And that's what fascinates me. That's what I like. And so I have to have a consistent voice. See, I had to learn how to write a book. It's same skill set as a reporter, but a whole different approach, a whole different perspective. You have to have a voice, a consistent voice that goes over 50,000 words. And so I think pictures help with that with that description. You can go to the next slide.
Before we move on, Michael, I just wanted to point out a fun detail in the painting I noticed too, which is the floorboards that they had to put down. I presume it was a dirt floor that would have been in the tavern.
Oh yeah.
In order to have a dancing floor, they had to put the floorboards down there. I just love that little detail.
I didn't notice that. And then
every time you look at it, now you're going to see something different.
Well, yeah, and then look, and again, right where the floorboards end, there's a pair of shoes or slippers. Now,
yeah.
Who takes off their shoes or slippers inside a tavern? So that's
especially on a wood floor that I'm sure had splinters. That's
lots
great.
of splinters. Yeah. So,
all right, I'll move on now.
Very good. Very observant. You're a good historian, Aaron. This drawing, and it's a very nice drawing, came to me from the nice people in Chatham Historical Society and Chatham Library, and I like it because it depicts a tavern, and you can see there's the stage wagon, and people are traveling. But this was a very special tavern. This was Day's Tavern in Chatham. And the thing about this tavern was it was the place where a man by the name of Shepherd Kollock, Kollock, he got a printing press, and he printed his Jersey Journal newspaper, sympathetic to the Patriot cause, in the back room of this tavern. That, to me, I mean, that's now... Talk about a point of interest for a tavern. He's printing a Patriot newspaper right inside the tavern. And that area was big, a lot of conflict going on between Patriot forces and the British Army. So he had a very important voice back in those days. Go to the next slide. I'm on a I like these pictures. This every year at Washington Crossing State Park, which is way south and on the west side of New Jersey, they do a reenactment of Washington crossing the Delaware, and it's on Christmas Day. That's when it happened. And this maybe was one of my favorite stories. I started with the historic retreat that started in when Washington, they were, I mean, in those early years, the Continental Army was not doing very well. They were getting beaten in all these battles. And George Washington, yes, he was the indispensable man, but he had his share of critics. And a lot of people, after he was appointed commander-in-chief, a lot of people in the colonial legislature said, who's this guy Washington? And is this the guy we really want leading the army? And he's not winning any battles. George Washington also had he had the jealous generals under him, so they thought they could do a better job. Well, they were getting the you know what kicked out of them. So they started the retreat. They crossed the Hackensack River, and then they crossed the Passaic River, and they were first heading to this is like November of 1776. They were the British Army was on their trail. They first wanted to stop in Newark, and that's where they basically in a tavern there in Newark. That's where George Washington made his headquarters. And that's how they rested for a couple of days. They continued on. They went all the way down to Trenton, crossed the river. British Army was a day or two behind them in the very early days of December. So they crossed the river over into Pennsylvania. They were safe, at least for the time being. And they went to a tavern in Pennsylvania, and they started to plot. Now, how are we going to do this now? How are we going to confront things? When are we going to? We need to win a battle. And George Washington, I think, was a very astute man. He was very smart, very skilled in the art in the art of war. And I think he must have had a lot of sleepless nights. And I'm sure he realized that we're going to go back over to New Jersey. We're going to have to confront the British Army. If we don't win now, it's all over. We're done. Finished. The revolution is going to fail, and there's going to be a lot of repercussions for that. So on Christmas, so from early Christmas evening, meaning at nighttime, they crossed over the river, and they had these boats, and they also had these flat platform boats where they could carry the horses and the ammunition and the cannons. So go to the next slide. Tradition has it that after they got across the river, and then keep in mind, there's a raging snowstorm and winter storm back in those days. These men in the Continental Army, these guys, I don't know what kept them going, but these guys, they were freezing. They were wearing rags. Some of them didn't even have decent boots. So Washington and his generals, they went into this tavern and they made their final preparations. They're going to travel south. They were going to confront the Hessians. That was the famous Battle of Trenton, and they were victorious. Now, the story about crossing the river back into New Jersey, again, there was ice in the river. At the point where they were crossing, maybe 10, 12 feet deep, not that deep, but deep enough where you could drown. You could lose all your supplies and all your cannons and all your horses. So Washington put out the word before the crossing. He called on all the ferrymen and all the tavern keepers. We need help. You got to come and help us. Help us cross the river. You know how to do this. So again, the people in the ordinary people back in those days, they answered the call. And the people in the taverns and the ferry keepers, this was a tavern that was owned. The people in this tavern also owned they did the ferry business. So they knew how to navigate the river. And so again, the idea that ordinary people played a very important role in the Revolutionary War back in those days. So now let's go the next slide. Name of the picture. Oh, the name of the picture, Tavern. That's like I'll tell you later. Now, Aaron and Angela asked me if I could look into Munn Tavern in Montclair. Now, the Munn Tavern, actually, my cutoff for the book was basically the end of the war and the Treaty of Paris, 1783, 1784. So I didn't go much beyond that. So Munn Tavern was a noteworthy tavern in Montclair, built or occupied around 1802. And I did a little research just to kind of answer the question. Captain Joseph Munn operated this inn or this hotel or tavern. And he was born in Orange, Essex County, May 4, 1744, died October 18, 1864. He was married to a woman named Martha Williams. They had 5 children. He came to Montclair around 1800, and he purchased the property. There's a chunk of property along Valley Road that's actually goes down past Bloomfield Avenue. And he opened the tavern. Now, again, history can be a little murky. Was the building still standing there and he just bought the building, or did he build the building? I don't know. It must have been a good location because you want to get customers for your business. So he operated for about 40 years. He was a very respected individual in the town of Montclair. He had a hat business. He made hats. He was also one of the leading Mason dignitaries in that area, and then the Masons would have their meetings there. He was described in one account that I said, Captain Joseph Munn, a man of large stature and commanding presence. So I guess he was a well thought of guy. And then I also saw there were also mentions of a Union Hotel and a mansion house. Now, I couldn't get too deep into this, but there was something going on back in those days. Now, as I understand it, this tavern, this inn, was saved. It was preserved. It's on the property now of the Unitarian Church. There's another 19 Valley Road. There's another house that's in that spot now, but it's not a remnant of Munn's Tavern. So, and I was also curious about this idea that Captain Joseph Munn, captain of what? Was that just a ceremonial title? Well, he led a group of militiamen when there was the Whiskey Rebellion way out in western Pennsylvania, and George Washington, he ordered the militias to go down and put down this. There was a big revolution about taxing whiskey, so he had a legit military rank. So he was Captain Joseph Munn. So that's what I know about Captain Joseph Munn. Probably not enough, but not bad for starters. So anyway, we can see I've got some other pictures of taverns around New Jersey. You can go to those.
And then just real quick for people who have a context of where the tavern is, this view, the first picture was a view through like an alley or like a parking lot kind of a view. But you can see here it's behind the Unitarian Church. So I included this map photo too. It's by that circle on Church Street. And then you can see it kind of through the parking lot there. So this is just an aerial view for anybody who needed better context for it.
So now you're traveling on Valley Road, cross over Bloomfield Avenue. I guess you're going south in that direction.
Yeah, so this is Bloomfield Avenue here.
Yeah, so it's
right,
so it's you'd be south, and that must have been it actually still is. There's the traffic circle, and there's some important buildings down there. So that it must have been a very popular spot in town back in the 1800s. So that's where it was located. So
there you go. All right, I'll move on now.
move on. All right, this is the Allen House Tavern. It's in Shrewsbury. What is the tavern? What is Munn Tavern used for today? I don't know. I tried to get in touch with the Unitarian Church people. Unfortunately, I guess they must have been busy. I would love to go there and take some pictures, but I have to wait and get their permission. So I don't know what it's used for today. Allen House Tavern. This is at the very historic Four Corners in Shrewsbury, and on each corner there's a historic church. There's a historic building. There's a historic cemetery. So the Allen House was a tavern that it kind of went back and forth between Patriot and Loyalist control but it's still standing, and it's used as a museum by the Monmouth County Historical Society, I believe. They maintain it. And when a building like this, it still exists after all these, 250 plus years, it's a blessing. You really, you see the place. It's a private home with many I didn't know that. It's a private home. Well, that's very interesting. I just thought it was a museum piece. They do have programs there. I know that much. And I took a picture there. One of these days I like to go down if they're having Bun Tavern. Oh, okay. Not the Allen House Tavern, but I'd like to go and really check out the interior of this. So we're I mean, New Jersey has such a rich history, and people in New Jersey, New Jersey people are very smart. They're very proud of the history. They like to hear about these things. They're very, very much interested in when something like this is still existing. Because again, this idea of living history on a local level. So you can go to the next slide. This is the Village Inn Tavern in Englishtown. Okay, thank you about Mun Tavern. There's a historical society down there that in Englishtown area that maintains this. The oral history is that this is where Washington made his headquarters during the Battle of Monmouth. There's not much documentation about it, but it comes from oral history handed down, and it's right near that area. But in any event, it's just the structure itself is very historic. I think it's on the National Historic Register, and it's maintained and operated by a historical society down there. So places are easy to find. I just Google them and I do a road trip, bring my camera, and take a picture. So, and that's the Village Tavern. The next picture. Okay, this isn't New Jersey. I mean, I'm a New Jersey guy. I'm always partial to New Jersey, but there's an interesting story here. All right, so this is France's Tavern in Lower Manhattan. Boy, what a nice place if you've ever been there. It's a very historic place. Great. Always have a very entertaining bartender. The tavern, the drinks are great. They usually have some music playing. The food is very good there. Now, this was the place in December of 1783. The war was over. They still had to sign the Treaty of Paris, but the war was over. The Patriots won. And so George Washington used this occasion in December of 1783. He wanted to meet with all his top generals, and they went up to the second floor and they had a big reception in the afternoon. And I'm sure there must have been a lot of speeches and a lot of emotional statements being made. And Washington, he toasted his generals. He said, "Thank you very much for your loyalty and your dedication. We want, this is a very important thing that we've done. We've won the war." So this went on most of the afternoon. So after the party was over, George Washington came downstairs with his entourage, went back over to the Hudson River, took the ferry boat over to Jersey City, and that was where he started. He then made his long march down to Annapolis, I think, and that's where he handed in his sword. He said, the war's over. I'm terminating my commission as commander-in-chief. Thank you very much. I'm out of here. But little did he know that he was going to be called back in and still had more service to do with his country. So, and the very last slide is how can you find? Well, I'm pretty easy to find, I think. I'm on Facebook. I've got a Instagram page. My books are sold in local bookstores. There again, the bookstore there in Montclair, the one on the Circle there, the
Watchung Booksellers.
Watchung Books.
Yeah.
What a beautiful little bookstore. The History Press they've got a website. They sell it. I sell it. You go to my website. There's a button you can click on it. I list all. I have an outline of all the books I've done, all 5 books, and so you can click on that. It takes you right to the History Press. So I'm trying to think what else should I mention here. Maybe let's go to some of these questions. Everybody's besides new. Oh, You know,
There was one asked by Joe. I think he was asking about the tavern before Mun Tavern. So I'm just going to go back real quick. He was asking what the name of this tavern was.
that that was it. It was originally known as the. It was owned by Dutch people, so it was, and they anglicized the name. So first it was the Slack Tavern, then it became known as the. I think today it's known as the Johnson Tavern,
Okay.
and the family were tavern keepers, and they were also they ran they ran the ferry boats across the Hudson River. So what a great park that it's the Washington Crossing State Park in Titusville, New Jersey, right on the Delaware River. So it's a nice field trip, and they have events there. And I went down there. I like to see things for myself, and I like to take pictures too. So I think it's known as the Johnson Tavern. So that was the family that owned it when George Washington when he had his retreat and then came back over on Christmas Day to confront the Hessians. So that's the name of that tavern.
I'm going to stop screen sharing now so I can see everybody, but yeah, we can definitely go through. There's been a lot of questions popping up in the chat. I know you saw a few of them. So
I'll try to answer them.
Yeah, let me see. Feel free if you see them, go ahead. I'm going to try and pull up the chat here on my end. Here we go. Let's see. So let's see. Oh yeah. So Kenneth had a great question right at the beginning. That what are the main, or it's actually a few questions at once. So I'll throw them out throw them all out at you.
Mr. Ronkowitz, my good friend.
Yes, there you go. Yes. So he asked, what were the main taverns in today's Essex County? What separates a tavern from a pub or a bar? And could it just be the time period that's what makes it different?
Yeah, I do mention, I was kind of curious about that. How were taverns, how were they identified? How were they called? Well, they were taverns, they were ordinaries, they called them that. They were pubs. The original idea for taverns here in the colonies, they tried to replicate the pubs that were in London. So that's how they, and there were all different scales of, some taverns were very plain and very simple. Others were very elaborate. There was a tavern in Princeton called the Hudibras Tavern, and they served great food, and it was a place where people would gather. So there's all sorts of stages of how elaborate a tavern was. What was the other? Oh, in Essex County, there's not many left. The tavern that George Washington stayed at on the historic retreat was, at least according to the oral history that came down, it was known as the Eagle Tavern. The Newark historians are pretty certain that's where he stayed. The question is, well, don't you have any documentation? Not really, because when Washington would send out letters to his generals or had to correspond with people, often he would only say something like Essex County or Newark. He didn't specifically mention his location because he was afraid that his documents would be intercepted and the British would know exactly where to find them. And I'm pretty sure he must have, while he was in Newark for about 3 days during that period of the Great Retreat, he must have changed taverns a couple of times just to make sure that he was trying to be as safe as possible. So not many taverns that I can think of in Essex County. Probably if I thought a little harder, I might be able to think of some, but at least from the colonial period. But from what we can gather, he stayed at the Eagle Tavern, which is now, I believe, is the site is where Newark City Hall is located now. So they tore down the tavern. They shouldn't have done that, but that's okay.
All right, so let's see. Joe then asked, can you name or can you list some of the more popular taverns that the founding fathers would have frequented? You did mention a couple that Washington visited. Do you know of any other taverns that the founding fathers would have visited?
Well, they would have gone there are, I mentioned a few. There were places, actually they went to taverns all around in New England and New Jersey. There was a tavern. Oh, this is an interesting story. There was a tavern in New Brunswick, and the building was saved, and it's existing in what's known as today as the East Jersey Old Town. and it's known as the Indian Queen Tavern.
Mhm.
Now, Washington went there during at the end of the war. He was lauded and congratulated for winning the war. Also, who stayed there was John Adams and Benjamin Franklin. Now, when you read about it, it's kind of a goofy story. What people always, apparently these guys didn't like each other very much, and so when it came time, they were traveling, and they spent the night at the tavern. And Benjamin Franklin wanted the window open at night when they went to sleep. John Adams wanted it closed, so that was some sort of silly argument that I think Benjamin Franklin won the argument. So I pinpointed Benjamin Franklin and John Adams at this tavern in New Brunswick. What I learned was that this was not just some leisure tour they were on. They were on their way to Staten Island at a very famous tavern there. And they were going there, and I forget the names of the British representatives. They were going there for one last negotiation pitch. They wanted to see if they could head off warfare. They wanted to see if the British would allow America to become its own country. And so from the tavern in New Brunswick, it was a one-day trip to Staten Island. So they were on their way to a very important place there. And of course, that conversation fell apart. There was no consensus, no negotiation, and it failed. And then the war happened. So there's one that you'll find. The Hudibras Tavern, it's not there anymore, but in Princeton there's now I forget the name of it now. There's a historic tavern there where I understand, according to the records, that very famous people would come, and they would discuss their political philosophies, and Thomas Paine was one. Thomas Paine, he for many years he was a Jersey guy. Eventually, he came from London, but he stayed at the Washington House Tavern in Bordentown. That was his watering hole. That was his haunt, and he would go there and he would hold court, and he'd have all these philosophical discussions. And there are accounts of him walking around Bordentown with his carry. He had a habit of carrying his hat behind his back. So there's a couple.
Love it. Nice. All right. So next question from Kim. Well, let's see. Oh, sorry. Yes.
Hi, Kim.
Well, I'll skip ahead to Kim. There's a few others, but I'll get in between. Oh, I'm sorry. No, Kim is next. I'm sorry. There's so many good chats going on. So So Kim asked, how many taverns qualify as historical today, and how many are protected?
To get on the National Register of Historic Places, that's a tough sell. You have to do a lot of research. And I've also been told that even if you're on the National Historic Register, that doesn't really guarantee you to be protected and saved. There's some things can happen. According to the sources that I read during my research, there were about 400 taverns throughout New Jersey during the colonial period, and they know that from tax records that they've collected, and that's in the state library. So about 400 taverns. Newbridge Landing in Bergen County. That's a charming place. They've collected some old buildings there. There were taverns there, and so what goes into saving a place? Was that the question? How does it get protected?
Or how many are protected today? But I mean, the how is also important too.
Yeah, so. I don't know. I don't know the account for that. Maybe I could go back and look, but I don't know that there's a tavern that's way down in Gloucester County, and that's still operating as a tavern. But there's historical documentation that back in the 1740s and the 1750s and the 1770s, it was a place where the Patriots, the Continental Army, and the British Army would be. There is a historic tavern. This might be on the historic register. Way down, it's wait a minute. Taverns. Let me look this up here. Oh, There's Merchants and Drovers Tavern in Rahway. That was on the route for one of the main thoroughfares between New York and Philadelphia. And that's still existing. You can go there. You can visit. They have all sorts of programs there. But what's the one that I'm thinking of here now? Hogan's Tavern. The Cranberry Inn in the beautiful town of Cranberry. The front porch, so to speak, that's the original tavern, and they built onto it. It's a wedding hall now. So you go to your wedding receptions there. So that was in the town of Cranberry. John Parker's Tavern in Bernardsville. It's still standing. There's a monument there put up by the Daughters of the American Revolution. This is where Washington, after the Battle of Princeton, they were on their march. They went up to, and they were going to encamp in Morristown. So it was part of the library system in Bernardsville. I don't think it is anymore. I think it's kind of just a community center now. So that's another one. Nietzer's Tavern in Long Valley. I had to go and see it. There it is. It's a Mexican restaurant now. So which is great. Here's the one I'm thinking of. All right. In Mount Holly, which is way down South Jersey, there is a tavern called 3 Tons Tavern, still standing, became a hotel. And I believe this is on the National Historic Register. And this was the place where the British Army had evacuated from Princeton, from Philadelphia, and they commandeered this place, spent some time there, and then they went up. They were getting ready for the Battle of Monmouth. So 3 Tons Tavern in Mount Holly, and there's lots of historic stuff about that I mentioned in my book. So I hope that answers. Does that answer the question? I hope. Yes.
So,
yes.
yeah.
Close enough. All right.
Next, we've got a couple questions about the painting that you showed.
Ah,
Do you know who painted it, when it was done, and where was asked? I know with genre paintings,
yeah.
it's not usually of a specific location, but maybe you have a where it was painted, possibly.
Okay. A lot of these places they don't depict New Jersey taverns, but they're from the same time period. I figured, well, okay, 1600s, 1700s. It's pretty much what a tavern would look like. The painting on the cover is a painting by John Lewis Krimmel, Village Tavern. And I bought that image from the Toledo Museum of Art. So so that's legit. I got that. I bought that from them. Now where's that other picture? The dancing picture. There's that one. Wait. The one that I showed with the people dancing and the fiddle player, that was painted by a Dutch painter. I can't find it right now for some strange reason. Here it is. Okay. Merrymakers in an Inn, 1674, painted by Adriaan van Olsted. I'm probably mangling the Dutch. 1610, he lived from 1610 to 1684. The painting was done in 74. That was on the public domain. And when I saw that, I said, I'm grabbing this. This is just what I'm looking for. So.
Love it. So Karen asked, did you research the Black Horse Tavern in Mendham?
Yes, I did, and I do mention that in the book. Again, historic tavern. I went there. There's a picture of it in the book. The exterior, that's all authentic, but I went there and knocked on the door. The door was open. I went inside. I found somebody who was working there. It is still a restaurant and a tavern, but unfortunately, most of all the accoutrements on the inside, all the colonial the period pieces that were decorating the room, it's all gone. It's all gone. So, but that's a legit tavern. It's in Mendham, and yes, and there were a lot of important stuff happened there. So yes, and you'll see the sign, and they do document it. So.
Tara asked, besides newspapers, what other archival sources were utilized for the book?
Lots. Um, and you, if you see the book, my publisher they're very insistent that I identify properly and accurately all my sources that I have in the book. So now they don't do bibliographies anymore. That's old fashioned. Now what they do are are Microsoft EndNotes, and there's an advantage to that. You can link to things where you mention in a book. But now oh my God, what a chore this was. It took no kidding. It took me a week to figure. I had to go back and I thought it would be very easy, but no, I had to go back. I had to find 313 Microsoft EndNotes that I had to painstakingly identify. So, okay, so I find stuff online. There's documents online. There's the documents that come from the state archives and the state library and the state museums. I go to towns and I meet with local historians and go to their museums that they maintain. Sometimes they have very good documentation. A lot of books that I reference are online and out of print. These books are lots of gems that you find in these books. They were published back in the. I actually saw one of the books that I referenced online that's out of print. It's as huge as like an encyclopedia. It was at a museum that I went to. And again, interviewing people, local sources, books from the library. A lot of the trick of this is, I'm not like Ernest Hemingway. I'm not writing prose here. I'm gathering all this information and trying to put it together again in a narrative that makes sense. I try to connect the dots, and sometimes it's in chronological order. Sometimes not. In journalism, you don't start with the first. You go with what's the grabber, what's the big news, what's the headline. You start with the most important thing and you work down. So a lot of stuff. And I called some authors that I found out, and they were very helpful. They were very kind. They shared some insights with me. So lots of when you get on this, when I really got started with the research, it's like the gears are turning, the wheels are moving, and you just one thing again, follow your sources. One thing leads to another. And I've been a reporter for a long time. My approach has always been, sometimes you get hung up on, sometimes you don't. But you go, you always walk in the front door. And I was always amazed with the things that I would find, the things that I would discover. And it's like, well, geez, I never knew that. And it's like, so that's the process. It's a grind, but it's a lot of fun gathering all this information. And then again, like I said, you kind of reach a critical mass, and then you start writing, and then you start, well, okay, this is the first chapter, second chapter, and then you're asking yourself questions all along the way. You're making changes. There's lots of rewrites. There's several drafts that I do. There's even drafts after I handed on deadline. I handed into the production department. Now they're asking me questions. Well, did you mean this, and why did you say that? There's a lot to it. It's a lot. I like I said, I've been a journalist for a long time, but I had to learn how to write a book. It's for things like this. I had to learn how to do it.
All right, so let's see. We've got a few more questions here.
Okay.
So thank you everybody for hanging tight here. So Brian asked, did you cover Bloomfield's Steak and Seafood? It is still operational.
Bloomfield's Steak and Seafood. Was that a Colonial Tavern? I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
I have to look into it. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
I know where Bloomfield is, where Federo used to build diners. I know that from my diner books. Bloomfield's Steak and Seafood. I don't know. I'll have to look that up. I have to tell you, when you do a book like this, the book comes out, it's published, it's in print. All right, people are reading it. The research doesn't stop. It's like this question. People are calling me out. Oh, did you know about the tavern? And I said, no, I didn't know about it. So now I have a file, taverns that I didn't know about, and I've collected, and there's quite a few. And 50,000 words sounds like a lot of words. It goes very fast.
Mm.
And I have to make decisions along the way. Like, oh boy, I'd love to keep this in, but I got to put this other thing in. It's like, you have to make these editorial decisions. Why did you write about this place and not about that place? Well,
Hey, can I jump in about the Bloomfield Steakhouse? Sorry, I'm a
sure.
trustee. I'm jumping into the presentation. So because we happen to go there a lot, the Bloomfield Steakhouse was actually a private home in colonial times, and
Okay.
now it's a bar.
Oh, it used
So
to be
if
Proud Mary's. Is that right?
I don't know, I don't know, I don't know about that, but
When
it
I
was a
went there,
private.
it was called Proud Mary's.
Okay.
Yeah, I see. I didn't know that. It was okay. A lot of times, what private homes, if they wanted to get a little extra business, they would just they put out a sign and say that we're a tavern, and you wanted to come in, you'd eat whatever the family was eating that night, you'd drink whatever the people in the house had, and you'd sleep on the floor, and that was your tavern experience. And the favorite drinks back in those days, rum was probably the most popular drink, especially in the beginning. And rum was a big part of the whole colonial economic system, from London to the West Indies up to Perth Amboy. And importing rum, and rum was very popular as a drink. The second most popular drink, this is what I've at least gathered from my research, was hard apple cider. And people loved cider. And the best apples came from the big orchards in Bloomfield and Newark. That's where the best apples came from. And a lot of these, they know about some of these varieties of apples. They kind of become extinct, but every so often they find one of these apple trees way out in the woods someplace. Oh, we've been looking for this. So yeah. And then the third most popular drink was beer. And
we had a lot of apple trees here in Montclair too that we talk about a lot.
Okay.
Growing up on the mountain. Yeah.
So you'd mix apple cider, and you mix rum, and you mix something else, and punch. Colonial punch was a popular drink back in those days too. So yeah, who was the first guy to actually brew beer in New Jersey? Probably a Dutchman in Hoboken, and there's some discussion about that. But again, these things, they get a little murky. I always try, as often as I can, I try to triangulate. I try, if I can get three sources to match up and say the same thing, I say, oh, okay, I'm pretty confident in this now. Or I say that something like, I always put in a qualifier, according to our best information, or, according to sources, so yeah, I always try to be very precise with my names and dates and places and events. So, but again, like I say, I'm not writing about these aren't academic books. These are stories. That's how I'm telling history. Right, Madeira wine and port. Yes, Madeira wine was that was supposed to be George Washington's favorite. Have you ever tasted Madeira wine? Ugh, not for me. To each his own, but it's so. Oh, more about Hoboken, somebody said. Wait a minute. More about Hoboken. All right. Let's see if I can find something here. So, more about Hoboken. Perth Amboy, Hoboken. These were very important places back in those days. Geez, I'm probably not going to be able to find it. But could be a route now. Probably not. I'm sorry. Well, wait a minute. Let me see. No. I was hoping I would just kind of stumble upon it, but anyway, sorry about that. Sorry, I can tell you more about Hoboken.
Well, quick question for you. So Barb asked, is there a map or diagram in the book that shows the locations of the taverns you talk about?
We talked about doing that. I don't know, for whatever reason, we decided against it. We were going to have like a fold out map on the front cover. But I mentioned places pretty specifically. And when I found out about a place, or it was mentioned in some resource when I was doing my research, I'd be curious. I'd say, well, I wonder if this place is still around. I'd Google it, and more often than not, I found it, and so I just went there. So I mean, a lot of times, you're, I, I don't always know where I'm going, but somehow I always get there. So, so it's the best way I can describe it. I get the, New Jersey, you get lost. I mean, even I'm a Jersey guy, I get lost. So, but sooner or later, I get to where I'm trying to go. So.
There you go. Joe asked, any taverns in Hudson County?
Hudson County. I don't know. So you're talking about, I guess you're talking about along the Hudson River there, right? No, I can't offhand. I can't tell you. Well, Perth Amboy is Hudson County, or no? That's no.
I'm
Okay.
seeing heads shaking now.
Okay. Close, but no cigar. I can't help you on that one. Sorry.
Is it Hoboken's in Hudson County?
Yeah. Well, there's lots of nice taverns in Hoboken. How far they go back, I don't know, but yeah. So.
Just a couple more questions in the chat.
Okay.
So Kim asked, have you visited the White Horse Tavern in Newport, one of the oldest in the States?
Yes, I went to school in Rhode Island for a couple of years, and then decided to come back home and finish up at Montclair State. So I know my way around Rhode Island pretty well. I used to go visit friends there. Yes, that's very historic place, the White Horse in Newport. Newport's a great town, by the way. I've been there. I don't know. I probably had a beer there, but I don't have any like tender memories attached to it. I used to go to a place. I used to like to go down to Newport and hear music. There was a place called Salt, and they had great acoustic musicians there. But I mean, this is like 1972, 73, 74. That's a long time ago.
And that Greg, I think two more questions in the chat.
Sure.
So Jim asked, so in December 1776, General Lee was captured by British troops at a tavern in Basking Ridge.
Yes.
Do you know if the tavern is still standing?
The house is still there, and General Lee was a big enemy and a big critic of George Washington, and at least, or maybe a remnant of the house is there, but he was seeing a woman romantically, and the stories that I heard were that excuse me for such a vulgar expression, but he got caught with his pants down when the British came to find him. So they captured him. Eventually they did something, they negotiated, and they won his release, but he was not a friend of George Washington, at least as far as I can determine. So yeah, I know that, but that was one of the places that said, well, there's actually a historic marker that talks about that. But again, you sort of weighing your information. I wrote about it, but I said, well, no, I got other things. So that's showbiz,
All right, last question. Jocelyn asks, is New Brunswick's Old Queen's Tavern mentioned in your book?
Queen's Tavern. Well, there was the Indian Queen Tavern, which I said is in that little historic park there now, that the East Village Old Town. It's in Piscataway along the Rowden River. There were all sorts of historic places in New Brunswick. Taverns, I mentioned a tavern that the local government used to frequent. I'm sure it's not there anymore, but New Brunswick, all right, Williamsburg, Virginia, it's a nice place. I went there when I was a little kid, but New Brunswick should have been Williamsburg, Virginia. We had all these buildings. I mean, you can't save everything. I know that, but boy, what a rich history. And then we're lucky. We still have quite a few. But okay. So yeah, we should have been Williamsburg, Virginia. So that's my opinion.
Jocelyn, clarify, it's the historic Old Queen's Tavern on Easton Avenue.
Okay.
If that rings any bells?
No, it doesn't.
Well, we'll have to make a part 2 of the book. Have Colonial Taverns, the sequel.
Possible.
Well,
the joke is always when I finish a book, you know, my marketing director says, "Oh, that's a great book. Okay, what's the next book?" I say, "Well, give me a little time here. I've been working on this for 3 years, you know."
Yeah, a little rest there. Yeah.
Yes, but there'll be a next book. I don't know what's going to be, but you know, there'll be something. So, thank you very much, everybody.
Yes, thank you. I think that wraps up all the questions.
Erin, thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
Thank you, everybody, for joining tonight. If anybody's interested and wants to share this, we did record it. It should be up on our YouTube channel by next week. If you just search Montclair History Center on YouTube, or if you go to our website, montclairhistory.org, you can find the link to our YouTube page there. You're welcome to share it, spread the word, share it all. Michael's email is in the chat, so if anybody wants to go to his website, please find it there. Otherwise, I hope you all have a lovely, safe evening, and make sure you're safe tomorrow with the snow if you're coming from New Jersey. But otherwise, thank you all again for coming, and I hope you have a great night.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Bye.
Jocelyn has a book idea for me. Okay, what is it?
Oh. Feel free, if you want to unmute Jocelyn, you're welcome to.
Go ahead. I'll take notes. Hi, Jocelyn.
Hello, Mike.
Hi.
My idea for you, because you worked for the Archdiocese of Newark, is to do a history of the Catholic Church as a new
No,
the Franciscan Church.
No. The Archdiocese of Newark said goodbye to me about 8 years ago, and goodbye. I feel goodbye. Okay, you don't want my newspaper anymore. I was the editor of the Catholic Advocate.
I understand.
Goodbye. No. Somebody. That's.
We'll find another author for you, Jocelyn.
Thank you.
Not to worry. Well, thank you, everybody. Good night.
Good night. Good night.